Welcome to an introduction to the Golden Bay Mohua Affordable Housing Project. My name is Chris Bennett, and I'm a civil engineer who lives in Pohara. The purpose of this project is to help address the affordable housing crisis here in Golden Bay. I'm going to go through the origins of the project, what the situation is in terms of the lack of homes for purchase and rental, and then go through how we propose to address that on the project. As part of my job at the World Bank, I was responsible for the Tonga Cyclone Ian reconstruction project in Ha'apai. The island was badly hit by a Category 5 cyclone, which destroyed most of the houses. And the project team and we worked to rebuild some 400 houses for families in quite a short period of time. And in early October 2020, I was doing a presentation on my career at the World Bank here in Takaka, and someone asked a question saying, well, if you could build 400 houses in Tonga after a cyclone, would it not be possible to do something similar here in Golden Bay? And I thought, well, let me have a look at this. And so from that one question, I spent the next 6 weeks working on what the issues were and what options were to solve it. And with a lot of help and advice from colleagues, friends, and others, we were able to come up with a potential way of cracking the problem we have here in Golden Bay for affordable housing. To begin with, you need to frame, I think, the current situation around an ethical question. And the question is quite simply this: do we accept that using the current approaches, over half of the families in Golden Bay will likely never own their own home? Or that if you're a renter, that you must be at a high risk of homelessness, move on average once a year, often live in unconsented accommodation, and really be vulnerable? And most people would answer no, that this is not an ethical situation. And so if that is the current situation, which it is, we have to do something. So moving forward, we need to understand that the approach I've taken is the simple premise that doing nothing is not an option. So what's being proposed is not necessarily a perfect solution. It's not the answer to everyone's needs, but does begin to address the challenges raised from this ethical question. Based on data provided to me by First National Realty here in Golden Bay, who have a list of the homes that were sold by realtors, doesn't include the private sale market. In 2020, there were, I think, some 55 homes sold, and this excludes lifestyle blocks, and the average price paid was $581,000. Now, in order to have a $581,000 mortgage, assuming a 10 to 20% deposit, you need an income anywhere between $70,000 and $100,000 a year to manage that price. And Golden Bay is not a very high income area, so there's actually a fairly small portion of people who can afford that sort of a cost. I did a survey into the Golden Bay housing. We had 107 respondents, and of those respondents, only 7% said they could afford to buy a house over $500,000. And yet 60% of the houses sold in 2020 were over $500,000. So you have a situation where 93% of the people can't afford 60% of the homes. And that's just an example of the large disconnect. And you can see from this figure that only one house was sold in 2020 below $300,000, and yet 37% of the people say that's all they could afford. So this gives you an indication as to this disconnect that we have in Golden Bay between what people can afford and the houses that are available. The survey also asked people for their experiences renting in the Bay, and over half of the respondents had been or were renters. And from this, 56% said that they lived in unconsented or accommodation, and not just for a short period of time. Some lived there for 5 years or more. Almost half of the people felt that they were vulnerable, and this manifests itself in different ways. Landlords offering to rent will sometimes decline to give a formal tenancy agreement because they don't want to have themselves in the system. And the people renting don't feel that they're in a position where they can demand that because they know there's many people around looking for the same place. Almost a quarter of the people have been homeless, and the regular story is that during summertime, when people can rent a place for far more for a short period of time at far higher rates, they often have only 8-month rentals and they have to move out of it. And this manifests itself in having to move quite regularly. And everyone, even those who weren't renting, felt that the rents were excessive given the quality of the housing. There's more information on this survey in the back of the report which I prepared. The current crisis sort of dates back as far as 2006, and acknowledgements to Nina Hindmarsh, who prepared this graph for her article and stuff. And you can see between 2006 and 2013, there was apparently a 41% increase in the number of people living in Golden Bay, but there was only an 8% increase in the number of houses. And that's probably a reflection of the start of this huge problem we have. But that's then compounded by the lower yellow line because 1/3 of the houses in Golden Bay are empty at any given time. Billy Kersk from Ray White commented that she had 569 people trying to buy a property right now in Golden Bay. Post COVID-19, people have realized, yeah, this is a great place to be. The situation is compounded by the lack of land for housing. There's very few sections available for housing, and when they are, they sell at a premium price. The last few sections all sold for over $250,000, and that translates into $250 a week just for the cost of your section before you put a house on it. So when houses are built on these sections, they tend not to be low-cost affordable houses, but rather more expensive ones. There's also a very large low-income population in Golden Bay, and this creates problems for them in terms of being able to borrow because they have a bad credit history or no deposits. And so it's quite a vicious cycle where there's not a lot of houses available. The ones that are tend to be expensive, and a large cohort of people don't have the ability to borrow the money to purchase a house. One of the key questions we had in the survey was the affordability. How much can you afford to pay rent? And this, of course, assumes that there's no subsidies coming through other services like MSW. So essentially, from this, you can see 57% of the people could only afford $300 a week as the rent, and there's quite a few who could only afford much less than that. Question for what could you afford to buy? And 67% of the people said they could only afford to buy a home below $400,000. And yet that's only 16% of the houses sold last year. So from this survey and the information that was given, um, it was possible to articulate sort of three broad challenges that we'd have to look at in order to address the housing affordability crisis. The first is, how do we build houses which themselves are affordable to rent or to purchase? The second is, where do we put them? Because we need land, and particularly in Takaka, where people want to live. And this map on the right is a figure of the 1% design flood, which shows that flooding is a key consideration in Takaka, and that's actually led to a lot of land not being used in town, but rather on the periphery, such as Park Avenue or Ronotai. And finally, how do you provide finance for people to rent or to buy these places, particularly to buy, I should say, because they may not qualify for any form of regular commercial financing. So with these challenges, the approach which I developed was to go from the bottom up. We needed to first of all say what is affordable in the context of Golden Bay, because there's no sense in having a solution which would only meet a small portion of the market needs. And from the surveys, the numbers broadly were $200 to $300 a week for rent and $300 to $400 a week for own or rent to own. Now, again, this is assuming there's no outside support from other government agencies. The second aspect is you need to fully comply with all of TDC's zoning regulations. They have statutory responsibilities to fill, and they can't simply say, well, we'll let you build in the flood zone without worrying about it, because that's illegal for them. And having workarounds slow things down, they make things complicated, but they often just create more trouble than they're worth. The third one, of course, is related to the second one, is to move rapidly. In other words, we can't sit around and talk about this for a couple more years. We need to be solving the problem right now for our community. And what this means is that we need a model which doesn't rely on government funding, etc. We need to find solutions which may be out in the market already and find ways of doing it quickly with existing organizations. The last one is perhaps the most important one. We can't help everyone. There will be people who want to have, for example, 100% natural houses with wood on the inside, etc. And at the affordable price range we're looking at, that's just not possible. The same way, there's some people with housing histories, credit histories, etc., which we just cannot be able to help. And if we try and help everyone, it'll just not be practical. So these were the four criteria which I considered as we developed the project design. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit, but not totally. I'm Canadian, and when I was growing up and doing engineering, we learned about this amazing American architect called Frank Lloyd Wright. And he was probably the greatest architect of the 20th century in the US. And he did this brilliant house called Falling Water in Pennsylvania. Back about 1936, I think it was, he was approached by this guy named Mr. Jacobs. And Mr. Jacobs said to Frank, "Can you build me a $5,000 house?" And that was about $80,000 today. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, "I've been waiting my entire life for this commission, but I have one question for you. Do you want a $10,000 house for $5,000 or a $5,000 house? Because you can't have a $10,000 house for $5,000. It just won't work." And Mr. Jacobs said, "No, I want a $5,000 house." And on the link here, you can listen to a really interesting podcast with this history of this story. And so Frank Lloyd Wright designed the $5,000 house. And among the things which he piloted as his Usonia house program were things like the open plan kitchen, the carport, because he recognized that you needed to change how you do things in order to achieve the $5,000 house. And so this philosophy is being applied throughout this project. There are people and possibilities to do things. People may want certain things. It's just not going to be possible if our focus is on affordability. And so it means there'll be compromises in some places, but what it does mean is that our first goal is affordability above everything else. And that's important to understand moving forward. So what's the solution? So the first one is to find houses. And what's very interesting is that right now, it's possible on paper to build a $150,000 house. This doesn't include the land, this is just the building itself. We've identified at least 9 different suppliers who have different options available to us, all of which we believe would meet the criteria of having an all-up house with power, septic, sanitation, etc. for $150,000. The constraints that we're looking at are these will be 2-bedroom, 60 square meter homes. We can do 3 bedrooms in the future, or 3 or 4 bedrooms, but right now we're just focusing on the 2-bedroom because that would meet about 60 to 70% of the housing demand from our survey. The houses would all be built to the code, and so be fully code compliant. They'd meet the government's healthy home standards, and as I mentioned, the cost all include services. On the right here are just 3 examples. We can buy kit set houses, such as the Quick Build, which appears to be about $125,000. There's modular homes, which are built in factories. This example of the Able Spaces Western Lake is $116,000 ex-factory. Or we also have houses such as the Goodison Architecture Design, which are specifically designed for affordable housing using a SIPS technology. And the estimated build price of those themselves is about the same as the quick build kit set homes. And so there are a number of options open to us for affordable homes. And that's a very good start. So with regards to power, one of the things that we're looking at is having solar as an option on the houses, even if you're doing on grid, because that would greatly reduce the cost of ownership to people. And if you have to connect to existing supplies, use sub-metering or something. In the townships, where possible, we connect to the reticulated supplies. But there's also self-contained options, and we can do things like grey water recycling, composting toilets, etc., if we have to, or just have specific site solutions for sanitation. Now, the largest challenge has to do with land. And we had a similar problem in Tonga with our project because in Tonga, women are not able to own land under the Constitution, and yet a sizable number of our beneficiaries were women. And so what we did was we used an approach called occupancy licenses, where the owner of the land provided a license for the owner of the building to have the building on their land for a period of time. Now, and this is the approach which I propose using here. It's not a new concept. License to occupy, occupancy licenses, they're different terms. An example of those is that retirement homes here in New Zealand use them because you don't own your retirement unit, rather you have a license to occupy it for a period of time. Tasman District Council already uses it for people who, for example, may have buildings which encroach into the road right of way. So what we're looking at here is what I would describe is a house hosting model, where essentially we would pay people to host one home on their existing title as a secondary minor dwelling. Many homes here in Golden Bay are on sections large enough and are zoned appropriately where they could host a secondary minor dwelling. And a key part of this, though, is whoever occupies that house would, of course, be vetted by the landowner because you want to make sure whoever's living on your property is acceptable to you. The project considers three different approaches in terms of paying someone for the occupancy license. A public good means that hopefully if we're doing something, for example, on TDC land, or if your cousin is homeless and you want them to have somewhere to live full time, you would not want to have a payment for the occupancy license zero. Now, others may say, we're retired, we could really use some additional income, and so they may want to have, say, $100 a week coming in from hosting the house. Or the third option is a capital return, where provisionally we would build a secondary minor dwelling on your property, and then after, say, 15 years, you would own that dwelling. And so 15 years is provisional, so it all depends on the final build costs. So I'll come in later on. But the key message is that the land is separate to the house and that we have a way of providing land for people to rent their houses on. I mentioned about consent, and this is from the Tasman District Council Resource Management Plan Summary Guide 15. And what this shows is that in rural 2 and rural residential zones, it's what's called a controlled activity, whereas that if you qualify, they must grant resource consent for secondary minor dwelling. Otherwise, it's a restricted discretionary application. But the point is that the provision of secondary minor dwellings is allowable under the resource management plan, and the key is to identify properties willing to host, and then use the existing regulations to confirm that that's suitable. What about house purchases? Ownership I've put into phase 3 of the project in the sense that it is a bit more of a challenge because the only way that we can really do this is have multiple dwellings on a single title. Traditionally, we thought of subdivisions where if you have an occupancy over 35 years, you have to go through the subdivision process. But that imposes not only costs, but also great delays in terms of addressing the housing crisis. There are 2 subdivisions which have been underway for a number of years now here in Golden Bay, which haven't been eventuated just because of the various regulatory and other challenges in doing it. And we simply can't wait a couple of years to address this. And at the same time, we also want to be able to build in the Takaka flood zone. And there is a guidance note from TDC explaining how one does it. There are issues around it, but both of these are issues which we need to get our heads around and find a solution for, because unless we can handle this, we definitely will not be able to provide home ownership. For implementation, this is an example of a model which we're working on right now. On the left, you'll see Tasman District Council, who have been really helpful with the project so far, giving us lots of advice. They have a statutory regulatory oversight role, and in that capacity, they will not be changing that. But they're also saying to us, right, um, if you do it like this is within the building code, therefore we can prove that much easier than something else. At the very bottom, we've been able to assemble so far an excellent team to help us with the construction of houses. Our builder is going to be led by Frank Byrne Builders, who will be doing the civil work. We have Sebastian Roberts from Golden Bay Roofing and Barry Graham from Golden Bay Plumbing, who are providing the roofing and plumbing. Paul Stalker from Azimuth will help with the solars, and ITM, of course, will be the suppliers for the builds that we use here. We're currently working with Habitat for Humanity to try and find if we can reach an agreement that they would be the overall lead for the project, providing governance, financial management, and ultimately the ownership of the houses. They are a registered community housing program, and this is hopefully a good fit for them. And we're looking at finance from community finance as a vehicle for supporting the financing aspects of it. But this is all still under development because nothing's been finalized as yet, except for the construction team. For funding the project, at this point, we're looking at funding through what's called a community bond model. This has been used, for example, by the Salvation Army to finance affordable housing elsewhere in New Zealand. The idea behind it is quite simple, that people in the local community want to support the project and they're willing to make an investment to see the houses are constructed. It's not a donation, it's an investment. And so what it means is that you'll get your money back over a period of time as well as a return. Currently, if you put your money in a term deposit with the major trading banks, you get about a 0.9% return. We would envisage approximately a 2% return on investment from our project. Currently, we have pledges of just under $250,000 for phase one, and so we're well on the way to financing the first builds, and we're looking to get the balance of that. At the same time, of course, we'll be looking for external funding, because if we can get this, it means if it's as a donation, it'll increase the affordability, or if it's even just as a investment community bond, we can build more houses more quickly. The next step is what I've called the proof of concept, or phase one. And it's really just to answer the question, can we really build $150,000 houses complete? Because on the paper it's possible, or to quote Frank Byrne, our builder, difficult, but not impossible. But we'll only know for sure by building and then seeing what actually happens. So the proposal right now is that we want to build 2 pensioner flats behind land on Commercial Street, where Tasman Street Council has 4 flats. TDC is reviewing this proposal to see if it's viable or not. And then we're thinking of doing another 4 houses for people who are working in the community, because we know that there's a real problem for the businesses to house their workers. We'll likely be testing different designs under the proof of concept, because as I mentioned earlier, there are different design options available, all of which appear to meet our target of $100,000 for a complete build. We envisage that for the phase one houses, the first 2 pensioner flats, we'll base them on the Goodson Architecture Affordable Housing Project designs. These were done for a program in the North Island, which didn't proceed, but they have designs for 2, 3, and 4 bedroom houses, which are ideal given our project requirements. These are designed to be very low maintenance, robust houses. For example, the interiors do not have jib board. They're able to be built either in a factory or on site, and our preference is actually to do as much on site as possible, as that maximizes the employment benefits to Golden Bay. And as you can see from these photographs, they're quite nicely designed houses. Now, just so you know, this is just a rendition, not a pensioner flat, so there will be a ramp, not stairs. And yes, if there are stairs, there will be a handrail on them. Other requests we've had is for some more customizations for the pensioners. And what we envisage happening is that we would sit down with people from the community to say, all right, what exactly do you think these houses should look like to meet the needs? And then we would work with the architect on hopefully meeting the expectations. So the plan is, I mentioned, to build 2 of these initially, and potentially other designs as well. For more information, we have our project website at mygbhousing.info. On that website, there's a tab called Resources where you can download the project concept proposal. And in the back of that, you'll see all of the results of the survey that we conducted. We also have the data from the survey if you want to drill into that. A whole bunch of frequently asked questions to answer hopefully everything which you want to know about the project and I haven't covered today. If there are other questions, please email them through to us and we will respond as well as probably update our FAQ. One of the key things that we're looking for right now are people to participate in the project. That is, we're looking for people who need housing, be it for rental or want to buy. We're looking for people who are willing to host the properties. We have a number of offers already, which we've sent to Town District Council for their review and comments on. And finally, we're looking for people willing to invest in our community bond to help us build the houses. So that is the overview of the project. In terms of next steps, as we move towards the Christmas shutdown period, we're trying to get a number of things finalized, such as the implementation arrangements, the discussions around the financing models, etc. The plan is that subject to land coming available, we would start our first constructions early in 2021. And hopefully we can begin moving forward as we get the land availability resolved and more financing from the local community for building houses. Thanks for your interest, and please contact the project team if you need any further information.